We can all probably see the contempt that elements around Keir Starmer held the Parliamentary Labour Party in, and it didn't end well for any of us, but particularly those who held the democratic process in contempt. But we know research has been done. We know people are being funneled toward more extreme and extreme right-wing content. Why? Because the people who own those platforms, who own the algorithms, who own the technology, it's in their interest. We can make Morgan McSweeney into a bogeyman, we can make Keir Starmer into a bogeyman, but I think it's best to look at it through the lens of a class dimension. Again, it's always a good way to look at it. I genuinely believe Andy Burnham wants to end 40 years of neoliberalism, but it's the degree to which he wants to end it. There's a kind of language that's beginning to be used now, and it does fill some of us with concern, which is we're hearing Andy and others around him use the term, we want to bring things under greater public control rather than public ownership.
Clive Lewis, Labour MP, thank you so much for coming on Turn Left.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure for having you, yeah. Okay, you're at Media Democracy Festival 26. Tell me how the day's been.
Well, I got here this morning. We were the first session. It was a good session. I've been here before. I've been coming to Media Reform Coalition for like more than a decade now, I think. And the issues are broadly the same. A small, kind of plutocratic, oligarchic group of individuals and corporations that control the media sphere. Key difference now is those same people are now beginning to take over the plumbing. And what do I mean by the plumbing? I mean the data flows, the algorithms, the AI architecture. That's increasingly now what's being controlled. And that's the control not just of the output, but actually the inputs as well. So, that is a very, very different beast, but also a very similar beast. It's about concentrations of power. And I think, what is very clear, and the reason I've always been interested in this is I've always been interested in what, is referred to as the crisis of democracy. And I have constituents. One constituent said to me the other day, 7 PMs in 10 years, this is ridiculous. Can someone stop it? And I just said, well, this is the crisis of democracy. This is what the perma crisis looks like. It's accelerating. It's not just like climate crisis, ecological crisis, political instability, war, resource war. And this is what it looks like here in the UK. That political instability is there. People instinctively understand that our democracy is increasingly out of control or being controlled. And the process, the liberal democracy that we've had, from the post-war period is being dismantled at a rate of knots. So, I've heard a lot of it before, but a lot of what I was hearing today was new. And I'm sure as we go throughout the day, people are going to begin to see the scale of the challenges ahead of us.
What's new this year then compared to last year? What are the things you've heard?
I wasn't here last year, so...
Okay, well, previous years anyway.
So, I think it's... Look, 10 years ago, I wasn't talking about Meta or X or Elon Musk or Larry Ellison and Oracle. We were, back in 2015, yes, we had mobile phones, but it was in its infancy. And people were talking about the liberating power, that we thought that this was going to give, citizen journalism a real boost in the arm, because you can now broadcast on YouTube. I've got my own show, I've got a phone. This phone here means I can now write my script, film myself and broadcast live, in effect. Yeah, you had a whole studio in your hand, which used to take a whole corporation to put together, a whole company, and you could do it in your hand. And that was liberating. It was being referred to as like the Gutenberg press of the 21st century. But what happened within that time, not just within that time, but the seeds of control were always there, because wealth and power, if you don't own something, you take it over, you buy, you begin to build the building blocks of control. And that's what was happening already at that time. So what was looking like something which could radically, revolutionize the ability to allow Novara Media, Owen Jones to leave The Guardian and so on, what we can now see is they control the algorithm, so that when you go on and go, what's news today? What pops up on your feed isn't going to be what you really want to see. It's going to be what they want you to see. And that's the difference now, So what people thought was potentially a burgeoning new era of democratized media I think again it's been captured, and now the plumbing, the infrastructure, the pipes through which it goes. You turn your tap on. I want to see a nice left wing podcast or some left wing. You turn your tap on, out comes whatever whatever they want within reason. You can go looking for it, but even when you put in the search, the enshittification. Now that term, and I think it was the word of the year last year, enshittification, it comes from the term for Google's increasing crapness. So there was a time when you used Google and you used to get really good search results. Like, wow, yeah.
Well, the first you see now is it's just AI.
Yeah, and now, I mean, it's changed slightly. They got this AI little bit at the top, but what happened was now it's all, you go down page after page of paid for stuff, and that's the enshittification process. So what started out as something which made Google's name was this fantastic search engine which would give you a broad range of options that were useful. Now it's been commercialized. Now it diverts you to where the money is. That's changed,
I mean, you just spoke to a point I really want to make, which is that a lot of people thought social media was going to be liberating. It was going to be more democratic. And you even have people like Elon Musk who complain about the quote unquote legacy media. But ultimately, legacy media has just transferred because you have the traditional corporate media, but the corporations haven't gone away. They've just slightly changed their face. But the corporations and the billionaires, the oligarchs and the trillionaires are still controlling these platforms. It's almost become quite regressive because, as you said again, the algorithms will push out certain content. Of course, everyone can go search up Novara Media on YouTube. The problem is reaching audiences that might not have heard of Novara Media are not getting recommended. So there's a big issue here.
So I guess the difference is, right, in the past, as long as there was the capacity to be able to create and print and have journalists and pay them to create a newspaper, whether it's the Morning Star, whether it was the Guardian, whether it was the Daily Mirror. As a consumer of news, you could walk out into the street, go to a shop, and you look at the shop, and it's like the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express. Well, I'll walk to the next shop where I know they sell the Guardian, the Mirror, and the Morning Star. Okay, but in effect, what's happening now? You walk down the street, you turn around, and you come back to the shop with the Telegraph, the Mail, and the Express, and you're like, whoa, what's gone on there? I want that, and you can find it if you know what you're looking for. But there are a lot of people who perhaps don't have the knowledge of what it is they want to hear. We require new people to be coming brought to these ideas, to hear them. And what they're doing is they're turning the pipes away so that they're not going. If I'm on X, I know that my stuff is being kind of funneled to a smaller and ever smaller number of people. So you can do the test yourself when if you put certain groups of words in, you know that your post is going to do really badly. Now, I haven't got any scientific evidence for that. I'm sure research has been done, but we know research has been done. We know people are being funneled toward more extreme right-wing content. Why? Because the people who own those platforms, who own the algorithms, who own the technology, it's in their interest. Why do they want people to be driven towards fascism? Because fascism is anti-democratic. And if you can take power away from the demos, from the people and the institutions that they've set up, that makes you more powerful. And it means that you will be less contained and constrained in what you can do until the point where you can actually just push democracy aside and do what you want, which is where they're aiming for. Everyone knows that.
I mean, Musk is quite literally trying to usurp liberal democracy.
They've written about it. They've written books. Peter Thiel and others.
They admit it, though.
They've written books. They're being honest and open about it. I mean, let's give them that. The analogy I used, in the session we just had, it's like you're strapped to a chair. The public are strapped to the chair, and in the chair next to you is your government. Okay. And there's this billionaire there screaming at the government, stay in the chair. And you're like, no, get up out of your chair and take them on. And as they're screaming up and stay in the chair, the billionaire is slowly assembling a bolt action rifle. You're like, look what he's... And you're like, it's like, do something. And the government's just going, oh, well, maybe. Oh, I don't want to offend them. Yeah. Will you please stop putting the gun together? It's like...
You mentioned that. Right, interesting. There's a government green paper called Watch This Space. Can you expand on that to our viewers what this means?
So Watch This Space is the green paper. Green paper is a kind of an early stage of a piece of legislation. And I've only just recently looked at it. But this is basically, the government has acknowledged, the government in the chair next to you has gone, yes, we can see someone is putting together a bolt action rifle, which isn't going to end well for us. And the government have acknowledged that. They can see that the concentration of power, not just in the media, but in the plumbing, is increasingly a problem. And they are, in effect, I think if we want to phrase it this way, politely asking Elon Musk to stop, and others like him, to stop putting together the bolt action rifle. And Elon understandably is just kind of giving them, flipping the bird, really. At some point, whether it's on water companies, whether it's on media ownership, data centers, at some point, we need a government that is going to reflect and represent the interests of our democracy, our class, and stand up to these people and actually use the power that we have to build alliances across society to kind of stand up to them and take them down. Because if we don't, by the time we find someone or a party or a movement that will do that, it could be too late. And so the clock is ticking. And this green paper, unfortunately, diagnoses the problem, but
it's begging for change to people who won't.
It doesn't actually do what's needed.
So do you think Keir Starmer's cabinet never took media reform seriously?
I mean, the Keir Starmer's cabinet are a multitude of people. I'm sure some people put it up higher up the political agenda than others. I can tell you in politics generally, amongst MPs, it's one of those kind of issues that people are aware of and they know it's important, but for many, it's a second order issue. It's like, I could think of people that I've spoken to about PR and the voting system, and people say, and I heard this around Andy Burnham's campaign, Andy needs to drop the issue of PR and constitutional reform. It's a sideshow. It's all about the cost of living. Now, clearly the cost of living is the most immediate thing. But surely as politicians, you're able to see the bigger picture and understand that the reason the cost of living is able to continue as it is isn't just because of the economic drivers. It's also because of the democratic failings, which mean that you have a democracy which is undermined by a right-wing media, by the right-wing plumbing that is pushing people in that direction, taking away the will of the public, the demos, to actually do something about it, feeding them misinformation, undermining the democratic institutions that could challenge them. That's also part of the problem. It's a structural part, it's a transparent part, but actually it's a real part. And as politicians, your job is, yes, I understand my constituents' main concern, many of my constituents' main concern is, can I keep my house warm? Would I have a home? Can I feed my children? Can I afford clothes? Would I have a job? And we have to deal with that. But we also have to deal with the structural drivers which have brought us to this place where we increasingly seem powerless to do anything about that. And that's the kind of the bigger picture that politicians have to keep. And I just think, I think my colleagues are very smart, very clever, but I sometimes think they just think these issues are second order issues. We have to make them first order issues as well.
It feels like that successive governments ultimately, there's an incentive to fix issues right away. Of course, cost of living one, but kicking the can down the roads for bigger issues creates more crises. So we have a crisis of the media, for example, and my view that yes, like climate change is the biggest issue that faces humanity, but you can't deal with climate change if we have our media. You can't change anything with our current media. So in effect, you think that media reform has to be as high on that agenda as everything else, because if you want to change those other things, you've got to deal with information.
Yes, it does. And it's a class issue. Yeah. Because this isn't, in water, one of the things you're going to see, one of the things to look out for in the Andy Burnham kind of premiership, one of the early warning signs about where it's going to land. I genuinely believe Andy Burnham wants to end 40 years of neoliberalism, but it's the degree to which he wants to end it. And there's a kind of language that's beginning to be used now, and it does fill some of us with concern, which is we're hearing Andy and others around him use the term, we want to bring things under greater public control rather than public ownership. And control is what we have already with, Ofcom, Ofgem, the various different regulatory arm's length bodies, which kind of, the last 40 years economic model has thrown up as these independent, impartial bodies which can adjudicate away from politicians and away from the people they're the energy companies, the water companies, and so on that they're kind of looking at. But the problem is they get captured. The problem is they don't really do their job, and the problem is that actually regulation will not fix the fundamental structural problem, which is these entities are being run for nefarious reasons, i.e. profit maximization, power, control. In the case of the media and the plumbing around it, it's not just profit, it's also about control of our democracies, to be able to make profit ever more profitable by limiting what democratically elected governments will do to inhibit their ability to make profit and to accumulate power and wealth. So this is a class issue, and from my perspective, the reason I think it becomes too rich for many politicians in the current parliament is that it's a class issue, which means that you have to go for the structural drivers. And what we see in parliament time and time again is a sense of incrementalism, a kind of end of history incrementalism, which basically says this is all there is. And for a long time, Keir Starmer's administration was basically saying we can tweak it, but we can't really change it. And I think the fear with Andy is that he does want to change it, but it's going to be more incrementalism, slightly faster, but incrementalism nonetheless. And I think one of the things everyone accepts that if you're going to take down a power structure like the global economic system that we have, of course it's going to be incremental in place, but it's a scale of that incrementalism, I guess. And I guess also fundamentally understanding if you want cheap water with ecological systems and rivers that are sustainable and no profit maximization, which is like pushing up your bills, you can't regulate for that. You have to own it. The public have to have control, not just control, but to actually own the actual nuts and bolts of it. And I think with our media, it's the same. It could be mutualization. It could start with the BBC, but at some point, we're going to have a lot more control and ownership of how our media is generated, because this is the transmission mechanism of ideas within our democratic system. And if it is controlled by those who have nefarious intentions towards our democracy, then you will find a narrowing of what is possible and also potentially, very disruptive, even game-changing for our democratic future.
Morgan McSweeney, obviously, some people call him the shadow prime minister, the right-hand man of Keir Starmer. There was a story about him that he went after the Canary independent media. So one could say that change didn't happen fast enough under Keir Starmer's premiership, but also potentially, not saying all cabinet members, but at least with the Politburo, that they were actively hostile to independent media. If you have Morgan McSweeney going after the Canary, I want to get your thoughts on that, but also something you said on the panel about the culture within the party. You mentioned how new Labour MPs in the 2024 general election were told by Morgan McSweeney, basically, don't rise above your station. So can you expand on that as well?
I mean, I was told by New Intake that they were being taken to see Morgan and, in effect, told that, remember, you're not here to hold the government to account. You're a legal necessity. Wow. Look, is it apocryphal? This was a story that was told to me by a New Intaker. I have no reason to believe that they were making it up. And I think, hindsight's a great thing. We can all probably see the contempt that elements around Keir Starmer held the Parliamentary Labour Party in. And it didn't end well for any of us, but particularly those who held the democratic process in contempt. We're elected by our constituents. But we also understand that it's the Labour Party that helps us to get elected by those constituents. But there is a balance to be had between what the Labour Party and the Labour government wants as the executive and the bureaucracy, and what we as democratically elected representatives feel our responsibilities to our constituents, to our democracy, to our principles and values, but also to the party and government that helped us get elected and we helped get it elected. It's a balancing act, and it was definitely out of kilter under the last administration. And when it comes on to the issue of, what the revelations about Labour Together and Morgan McSweeney and others and what they may or may not have done to the Canary, I've read some of those details and I can't verify them. The Canary definitely did take a hit. I saw that, accused of being anti-Semitic and so on and so forth. I think if you understand what the kind of Labour Together project within the Labour Party was about, we can make Morgan McSweeney into a bogeyman. We can make Keir Starmer into a bogeyman. But I think it's best to look at it through the lens of a class dimension. Again, it's always a good way to look at it, and a power structure. And what Labour Together was about back in 2015 when Jeremy Corbyn came in, no one saw that coming. Okay, the faction that the right of the Labour Party never saw that coming. They thought that Liz Kendall was going to get millions of votes when they opened it.
4.5% in the end, wasn't it?
The 4.5 percenters, and they were shocked. And obviously, they just as they never saw Brexit coming. This was the kind of the nascent stages of this kind of rising populism, not just in the UK but across the Western world. After the 2008 crash, nothing really changed. In fact, it got worse. We had austerity. The public were like, we've had enough of this. And consequently, in 2015 and then 2016 in Brexit, what you're beginning to see was the beginnings of a populist backlash, a populist uprising. How was that interpreted by the right of the Labour Party? It was interpreted as a kind of, how dare you get back in your box? How dare you support a left-wing reprobate like Jeremy Corbyn? This is outrageous. We are the adults in the room. We are the technocrats. This is a serious politics. How dare you come and join the Labour Party and mess up, our cosy relationship with power? And we had the chicken coup that when frontbenchers attacked the Corbyn administration, and then we had the 2017 election, which Corbyn almost won, but never quite did, but won a massive share of the popular vote. And many of the millions of voters who voted for that 2017 manifesto, I have no doubt, are now voting or intending to vote for reform. And what you can see then was the seeds of a kind of populist backlash and the beginnings of populist politics in the United Kingdom. And whatever I think of Nigel Farage, for a lot of people, and I was in Makerfield, I don't think they really wanted to vote for him. I think they were turned off by his cold rage comments. But for a number of them, they were voting reform because they were sick and tired of what they considered to be the Uni Party and the betrayal of the Labour Party to them as lifelong voters, generational voters. Nothing had changed substantially, and they were tired of that. And if I have to vote for reform to kind of buck the system, just as I voted for Brexit, even though I know it might have hurt me, I will do so. And that doesn't account for everyone, but it accounts for some. What you saw, what Morgan McSweeney and Labour Together represented was a reaction to that. And when they realised that they were no longer able to control the party and would probably not be able to win a democratic election under those conditions, they came to the conclusion that they had to kind of generate the 10 pledges, find a suitable Trojan horse and come in. And ultimately, what are they the expression of? They are, in many ways, the expression, you could say that they're kind of the technocratic adults in the room. That's one interpretation of it, and some are. But they're also the expression of a collusion between those who run the Labour Party and a collusion with those who are our class opponents, okay, frankly. And the Labour Party has been captured by them, and they were operating in their interest. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone that operated in the Starmer government, everyone that operated in the Labour Party bureaucracy had suddenly decided, I'm going to become, some kind of class quisling and work with the billionaires and plutocrats. That's not what I'm saying. But there was definitely an understanding that the status quo, where wealth and power was in the economy, it needed to be tweaked, but fundamentally that relationship was just fine, thank you very much. And that's a problem. Because if you have one in a first past the post system, you're always going to have two key political parties, and that's in effect what we've had for many years, although it's fragmenting. And one was meant to represent the interests of capital, one was meant to represent the interests of Labour. But then when you get a blurring of that, that's then caused the kind of the meltdown of the Labour vote, the red wall, the collapse, and this crisis of confidence within the Labour Party. And that's very much where Andy Burnham has now stepped in to say, I've heard, I've listened, and there's a new contract with Makerfield and a new contract with the party where I'm ending that 40 years. Now we will have to watch and see whether that's the case.
Have you spoken to Andy about media reform or anything like that?
No.
No. I think a lot of us are sceptical about whether national policy will change that much under Andy Burnham. However, some could say his leadership could open up the party again. You can organise under it. Local councillors don't need to be scared to speak out against the Politburo again. So even if Andy Burnham doesn't change national policy that much, do you think under his leadership means maybe the left could reorganise again and there's more opportunity?
So I think, yeah, the kind of the low end expectation is that the left of the party, the broad left of the party, will be able to openly organise and speak up. And that's not just a kind of shoot down or criticise. You know, one of the things that you need to understand about the Labour Party, a lot of people have this kind of misunderstanding about what factionalism is. And when you understand the history of the Labour Party, the Labour Party was a federation of trade unionists, socialists, temperance movement, suffragettes, all these different groups that came together. Suffragettes probably a little bit earlier, but it was a hodgepodge of different radical and different traditions inside that formed together to create the Labour Party, to be able to form a coalition big enough under first past the post to push out the Liberals and take on the Tories, or push out the Tories and take on Liberals, whatever. And that then means that in a kind of federated structure with these different groups, you need internal party democracy and rules that are transparent and fair to all to allow the kind of battle of ideas to take place. And sometimes one group or a coalition of groups will come together to come and say, well, look, the economy's changed, society's changed, we need to change. And you would argue with those ideas. And from thesis and antithesis came synthesis, a stronger position, and you were better organized, you had more people, you could then take control of the party and then put the manifesto to the country. It's a kind of almost a kind of Darwinian ecosystem, if you want. And it worked, more or less it worked. But what happened in 2019 was that, in effect, they said the ecosystem has to die. The democracy and transparency and accountability gets cut out. It had begun to some degree under Blair, but never to the degree that we saw under Starmer. Yeah, that's right. And he won he believed he won the arguments, but the arguments were had. But there were no arguments. It was because it was control, and it was basically lopping off a big chunk of the membership and the support base that they believed were anathema to their aspirations to form a government. But it comes at a price, because then the ideas, the stress testing of what you're doing, you lose touch with your base. We are, whatever people think of the left, we are connected out into the real world, and we are connected out to millions of voters. And if you want to lop that off, then you do so, and it comes at a price. And that's what I think. It's not the only reason Keir Starmer and the administration fell, but it meant that the Labour Party was no longer effectively operating as it needs to. So I think under Andy Burnham, if that ecosystem is there, if we get rid of the sectarianism, then that's good. But factionalism is a good thing. Yeah, I've got no issue with factionalism. It's where you organise. Sectarianism is the bad bit. And Labour together, Keir Starmer were deeply sectarian, and they cut off, one of the wings of the plane of the Labour Party, and then you wonder why it goes into a kind of nosedive. You chopped off one of the wings. It needs both wings. It needs all parts. It needs the body, the tail, the wings. Yeah. So I think under Andy, the hope is that we can be an integral part of the party again, contribute to policy. Our ideas are a legitimate expression of what it is to be a Labour Party member, to have socialist ideas and socialist solutions to, I'm a democratic socialist. I want democratic socialist solutions represented and reflected in the party's policies and programme for government. Now, I understand, the 2024 manifesto is quite a tight and narrow affair. It's not the most ambitious of documents, and that possibly will constrain Andy Burnham and an Andy Burnham government. But what it is able to do, and what Andy is able to, is to signal the direction of travel he wants to go in, so that should there ever be when there is a general election, the country understands where he's heading and understands there are limitations. because you've lost that electoral charge by changing the prime minister. But nonetheless, we can see the direction of travel he wants to go in. So that's what everyone's looking at. But I think as a bare minimum, the ability for the left to speak up without fear, I think is a good thing. That doesn't mean to destabilize, but it means to have that battle of ideas and debate and discussion to make sure we arrive in a stronger place as a party and as a government.
So finally, we all talk about the corporate media, the concentration of media, especially in this country, very, very concentrated. That's one thing. Of course, we need to take on that power. But what about independent media? So Turn Left, we're still a bunch of volunteers. We don't make enough income to sustain ourselves. There are many left-wing platforms that do not see the same kind of algorithmic favors that the right get. So yes, we can talk about corporate media, but what do we do to make independent media strive, successful, and also self-sustainable? So like Turn Left, we can be full-time and I can dedicate my entire life to this project.
So I think first of all, stop any further concentration of power in the media. Secondly, I think we've got BBC Charter renewal, which is a once in a 10-year opportunity, a critical time to be able to turn the BBC, which I think it should be an integral part of the welfare state, democratise it, mutualise it, give it some real teeth and some muscle to be able to take on some of the big tech platforms and some of the big tech oligarchs and the power they have. This should be a democratically transparent, accountable entity, the BBC, which we know at the moment it's lost trust from both the right and the left of politics. We need to rebuild that as something which can take them on and act as a platform of a defender of our democracy and of information and tackling disinformation. I think we shouldn't be scared of the BBC. The BBC is a gem, it's a jewel. We just need to make sure that it's properly polished and can do what it needs to do. I think the other part of this as well is funding independent media. Now, a lot of people think, I worry about when people talk about state media, because, state media is fine when you've got people in charge of the state who have, decent values and integrity. But if, let's say, the state is handed over for some reason to those that don't, then that becomes a problem. So I think that ecosystem of supporting independent media is critical. And people have already explained how you could have a social media levy or a kind of levy on big media entities, big media platforms, if that money can then be diverted and invested into a model that's now broken. So, regional media has all but disappeared. It's owned by 3 big, large corporations, many of them, kind of more private equity than anything else. They are making money still. There is advertising revenue that is increasingly being made by Meta and others and Google. We should take some of that, the billions that are being made in the UK and siphoned and extracted out, and that should be reinvested in citizen media, in democratizing that independent media ecosystem, because it's good, it's strong. Now, clearly there have to be certain values, like independent media. You can't do I want to be funding, hard right-wing people who are anti-democratic and who are spreading hate? No, but there has to be a kind of level playing field. Not everyone we find agreeable about what they're saying about what the politics and policies of the government should be or how we should organise ourselves. But if you buy into what we would call the broad aims and values of liberal democracy, people's right to speak, but not a right to incite hatred and so on and so forth, I'm sure we can find a way of funding independent media so that we've got a broad ecosystem. It's no point just having what we call a broad ecosystem of just left independent media. It's got to be broader. Yeah. That's a little bit more difficult, but it can be done. And that way you get buy-in and consensus, but that needs to happen. But at the moment, we've got an increasingly extractive system, which has destroyed what was left of the old legacy kind of masthead media at the local level. That needs to be rebuilt, but we don't want to rebuild it as we did in the past. We want to rebuild it in a different way, and that means supporting independent media, perhaps through that mechanism.
Clive, thank you so much for coming on Turn Left.
Thank you very much for having me.